A homeless father sold the only roof he had to save his blind daughter's sight. But just when it seemed hope had run out, Big Shaq stepped in, and what happened next shook everyone's heart. A sacrifice, a silent promise, and a moment that will leave you wiping your tears. This is not just a story, it's a journey of love, loss, and miracles you'll never forget. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The Florida sun beat down with a fierce, sticky warmth that clung to the streets of Clearwater, like a second skin. The breeze was barely a whisper through the swaying palms, and the sky hung wide and open, blinding blue, endless and merciless. In that heat, the world seemed to slow, to stumble on its feet, gasping for breath. Caleb Bryant sat in the cracked plastic chair outside the children's hospital, a wrinkled baseball cap twisting nervously in his rough, calloused hands. His heartbeat thudded so loud it drowned out the world around him. Inside, somewhere down a sterile hallway he could not bring himself to enter, his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, lay in a hospital bed with too many wires hooked to her tiny arms. The last thing she had seen clearly was the color of Caleb's shirt a month ago. A soft orange that she said reminded her of popsicles and sunsets. Since then, darkness had been closing in, slow and certain, stealing pieces of her world while he stood helplessly by. The doctor's voice still rang in his ears, that clinical detachment that stripped the heart from every sentence. Retinal dystrophy. Rare. Aggressive. Expensive surgery. No guarantees. The words had collapsed in on themselves, forming a wall between Caleb and whatever hope he might have tried to cling to. He glanced down at the soles of his boots, caked with dried mud from the construction site. It had taken him 10 years to scrape together enough credit to buy the crumbling 2-bedroom house he and Lily called home. 10 years of taking every weekend shift, every night job, swallowing the insults, the condescension, the yes sir and no sir, that barely veiled the steady drip of racism in his boss's voices. No matter how much sweat he poured into the earth, the latter always seemed just out of reach. And now, standing at the edge of his daughter's darkness, the realization hit him like a gut punch. There wasn't enough left. Not enough time. Not enough money. Not enough mercy in a system that had never really been built for men like him. Caleb lifted his head as Lily's laughter floated through the heavy glass doors. Even now, even tethered to IV poles and monitors, she found reasons to smile. She joked with the nurse, her fingers fluttering across a page of raised dots she was just learning to read. Braille. The word itself felt like an anchor sinking deep inside him. It meant preparing for a world she couldn't see, a world she didn't deserve to be trapped in. Standing up, he forced himself back into the hospital, shoulders squared against the sterile chill that prickled his skin. Lily's face lit up the moment she saw him, her hand shooting up, beckoning him closer. Caleb pasted on a smile, but inside something fractured a little more with every step. "Daddy, guess what?" she chirped, reaching out, until her fingers brushed his wrist. "What's that, Peanut?" he said, the words coming out thick, brittle. "I can still see the outline of your hat." Her voice brimmed with pride, as if holding on to that last fragment of vision was some great victory. Maybe it was. He ruffled her hair, biting down hard on the lump swelling in his throat. The nurse cleared her throat delicately, shifting a folder in her hands. Caleb met her gaze, and immediately knew it was time. He followed her into a small consultation room, where the walls seemed too close, the ceiling too low. Dr. Holloway sat behind a battered oak desk, her white coat pressed and crisp, her eyes kind but tired. She didn't waste time with small talk. "The surgery window is closing fast," she said. 3 months, maybe less. Beyond that, the damage will be permanent. She slid a sheet of paper across the desk. The number scrawled at the bottom might as well have been a death sentence. $87,000, Caleb inhaled sharply, his fingers clenching on the chair arms. He worked 70-hour weeks just to keep food in the fridge. 87,000 might as well have been 8 million. "There are programs," Dr. Holloway began, but Caleb waved her off. He'd heard it before. Long wait lists, red tape, lottery systems, assistance that almost never reached men like him. Not quickly, not enough. On the drive home, Caleb kept one hand steady on the wheel, while Lily sang softly beside him, her face turned up toward the passenger window, chasing the feel of sunlight on her skin. The sight of her, so small and brave, carved another deep hollow inside him. The truck coughed and sputtered, protesting the heat, and he wondered how many more trips it had left in it. Probably about as many as he did. Home was a battered little place wedged between two vacant lots. The grass scorched yellow and the porch leaning like a drunkard against the weight of the world. It wasn't much, but it had been theirs. A fortress against the storms of life, a place where dreams had once grown wild and untamed. He tucked Lily into bed that night, her eyelids fluttering as she drifted off mid-sentence. In the faint moonlight, he could still make out the posters she had drawn, suns and flowers, and smiling stick figures. A world she was slowly losing piece by piece. In the quiet dark, Caleb sat at the kitchen table, staring at the peeling laminate counter, his mind turned in tight, frantic circles. The surgery was her only chance. Without it, Lily's world would narrow down to textures, sounds, and memories. He thought about the house, the way the roof leaked when it rained, the sagging foundation, the faulty wiring. It wasn't worth much, but it was something. Sell the house. Pay for the surgery. Find a way to survive afterward. It was madness. It was the only plan he had. The next morning, Caleb found himself in the gleaming glass offices of Mayfield Realty, his ball cap crushed nervously in his hands. The woman behind the desk, neat hair, sharper smile, didn't even bother hiding the flicker of disdain when she sized him up. "You're looking to sell," she said, her voice slow and careful, as if speaking to someone dim. He nodded. "Quick sale. Cash preferred." She skimmed the address he gave her, nose wrinkling slightly. That part of town, the words didn't need to be said aloud. They hung heavy in the space between them. After a cursory glance at a few faded photographs he had printed from the library, she tapped a few keys and then smiled without warmth. "I can offer 40,000. Tops," she said. Caleb blinked. 40? The land alone was worth more than that. But he knew better than to argue. In her eyes, he was desperate. He was expendable. He was exactly the kind of man who would have to take whatever scraps were tossed his way. He left the office with a hollow pit where his pride used to be. Walking back to the truck, the weight of invisible chains tightened around his chest. No matter how hard he worked, how straight he walked, the game had always been rigged. Later that week, he posted a for sale sign himself. He sat on the porch, sweating through his shirt, watching cars slow down just enough to get a look at the place, and at him before speeding off. Occasionally, a few stopped. They lowballed. They smirked. Some didn't even bother pretending to be polite. At the grocery store, he caught the sidelong glances when he paid with change. At the gas station, he felt the cashier's eyes bore into his back, waiting for him to make the wrong move. In the places he had once moved invisibly through, Caleb felt the walls closing in, the labels pressed onto his skin. Lily, blissfully unaware, spent her afternoons sitting on a faded blanket in the front yard, sketching with crayons. She no longer bothered trying to stay inside the lines. She simply let the colors roam wherever they wanted. Watching her, Caleb made a silent vow. No matter what it cost him, no matter how small the hope, he would find a way. Because some lights were too precious to let fade away. And some battles had to be fought, even if the world pretended not to see. Even if the cost was everything. The paper sat on the table like a loaded weapon, its numbers too sharp, too final. Caleb stared at it for what felt like hours, the black ink bleeding into the corners of his vision. $114,000. That was the final estimate, the cost of saving Lily's sight. Not a guess, not a ballpark, final definitive. There was no room left for dreams or prayers. This was a wall he couldn't climb, a tide he couldn't outswim. In the silence of the kitchen, Caleb gripped the edge of the chair so hard, his knuckles paled. The house creaked around him, as if groaning in sympathy. He had fought so hard to give Lily a sense of stability, of normalcy. But stability didn't buy miracles. Stability didn't rewrite the brutal math of survival. His daughter's future was priced out of reach, cold and impersonal, and no one was coming to save them. Tears burned behind his eyes, but he swallowed them back. He had cried enough already. In the privacy of his truck, behind the doors of bathrooms, into the calloused palms of his hands. He would not cry here, not now, not while the battle was still being fought. Lily's soft humming drifted down the hallway, an off-key lullaby that pierced the armor he fought so hard to wear. Caleb dropped his head into his hands and let out a sound, something raw and broken, a half-sob that didn't belong to any man who wanted to survive in the world the way it was. The weight of hopelessness pressed down on him, until it felt like he was sinking into the floor itself. The next morning, Caleb plastered on a smile and started the process of selling the house. Flyers at the local church, handwritten signs on light poles, desperate posts online where hope went to die. He fielded calls from investors who spoke to him like a man selling stolen goods, their voices dripping with suspicion. A few came to see the house, stepping over the threshold with wrinkled noses and condescending glances. They pointed out every crack in the foundation, every flake of peeling paint. Like surgeons dissecting a corpse, they asked questions that weren't questions at all. "You sure you're the owner? You got clear title, right?" Their meaning clear beneath the surface. Each encounter left Caleb smaller, more worn down. They didn't see a father trying to save his daughter. They saw a man they could squeeze a bargain from, a black man desperate enough to accept whatever crumbs they offered, without complaint, without dignity. The offers that trickled in were laughable. 20,000, 25 if he was willing to be out by next week. One man, a slick real estate shark with gelled hair and a fake smile, had the audacity to offer 15 grand in cash, right there on the spot, waving a wad of bills like bait in front of a starving dog. Caleb stood there on the crumbling porch, the offer hanging in the humid air, his pride screaming against the raw need, clawing at his insides. He wanted to punch something, to scream, to demand to be seen as a man, not a mark. But the thought of Lily sitting in that hospital bed, her world shrinking with every day that passed, pulled him back. "I'll think about it," Caleb muttered, stuffing the man's card deep into his pocket like it was something filthy. The buyer drove away without a second glance. Around him, the community he had quietly served for years, fixing fences, mowing lawns, babysitting for neighbors who needed a hand, turned away. They didn't see him anymore. Or maybe they never had. Some avoided eye contact at the grocery store. Others made sympathetic noises without offering real help. The few who did ask after Lily did so with the distant, empty sorrow reserved for other people's tragedies. The realization hit him harder than any insult ever had. Sympathy was cheap. True compassion came with a cost few were willing to pay. As days stretched into weeks, Caleb's sense of time unraveled. He sold off what little they had that could bring in money. The television, his father's old guitar, Lily's pink bike, the one she had outgrown but refused to part with because it had training wheels painted with tiny gold stars. He tucked the money away in an envelope taped to the underside of the kitchen drawer. Every dollar a drop of water in a desert. Still, it wasn't enough. The house remained, the last fragile thread tying them to any semblance of security. Selling it meant homelessness. It meant truck stops and parking lots. It meant praying every night that the police wouldn't tap on the window and ask them to move along. But selling it also meant Lily might see again. It wasn't a choice. It was a surrender. One evening, as the sky burned orange and the cicadas droned their endless song, Caleb stood on the front lawn, for sale sign drooping to one side. He watched the sun sink low, the shadows growing long, and felt the weight of generations pressing against his shoulders. Men who had worked until their hands cracked and bled, who had bent their backs and lowered their heads, hoping for a sliver of dignity in a world that took without mercy. He would not let Lily be swallowed by that same darkness. Not if he had even a whisper of a chance to change her fate. That night, Caleb sat at the kitchen table and scrawled a shaky signature across the sale contract offered by one of the buyers, the best of the terrible options. It wasn't enough, but it was something. It was a He didn't sleep after that, just sat in the hollow silence, listening to the ticking clock and the slow, steady breaths of his daughter in the next room. Tomorrow, the world would shift beneath their feet. Tomorrow, there would be no more home. But there would still be hope. And sometimes, that had to be enough. A truck groaned in protest as Caleb coaxed it into the cracked parking lot beside the faded public park. Dust rose around the tires, hanging thick in the warm Florida air. The world outside buzzed with life. Kids shouting across cracked basketball courts. Teenagers slouched on bleachers. The rhythmic slap of sneakers against asphalt. For a moment the noise almost covered the hollow ache inside Caleb's chest. Their home, if he dared call it that anymore, was now the rusted Ford pickup parked beneath a dying oak tree. The windows rolled down to let in the heat. The back seat crammed with duffel bags, a few worn books, and Lily's battered sketchpad. The sale of the house had bought them a few nights at cheap motels and a handful of hot meals, but that cushion was already gone. Now they floated day to day, ghosts in a world that barely noticed them. Lily sat cross-legged on the curb, her sketchpad balanced on her knees, the stub of a blue crayon clutched in her fingers. Her tongue poked out in concentration as she dragged color across the page, a blur of shapes that no longer formed the clean images she used to draw. Caleb leaned against the truck, watching her with a mixture of pride and unbearable sorrow. She hadn't complained once. Not when they left the house. Not when they slept cramped and sweating in the back seat. Not when they skipped meals to make the last tank of gas stretch further. She just drew. As if the act of creation itself could keep the darkness at bay. On the court, a pickup game rumbled to life. Young men and teenagers shouting, laughing, arguing over fouls. Caleb barely spared them a glance, until a figure moved into the game's periphery. A towering man, moving with an easy, fluid grace that made the other players look like children around him. He wore a plain black t-shirt, stretched tight across massive shoulders, and old sneakers that squeaked against the court. There was no entourage, no spotlight, no swagger, just a man blending in, if such a thing was even possible for someone of his size. Caleb squinted against the sun, recognition stirring in the back of his mind, but refusing to fully surface. Something about the way the man moved, powerful yet light, like he carried history in his bones, tugged at him. The game paused briefly, as the giant laughed at a bad pass, clapping one of the younger players on the back, his voice deep but warm. No one treated him like a celebrity. No one mobbed him for pictures. If anyone recognized him, they kept it to themselves. Here he was just another man with nowhere better to be. Caleb's attention drifted back to Lily. She had shifted her sketchpad, her head tilted at an angle, her crayon moving faster now, bolder. She wasn't sketching suns or flowers today. She was trying to capture something, someone, towering, kind-eyed, larger than life. The big man noticed her first. His gaze slid over the court, caught on the small figure crouched by the curb, and lingered. Caleb tensed instinctively, protective, but there was nothing predatory in that look. It was curiosity, gentle and immediate, like someone remembering a half-forgotten song. The game broke up a few minutes later, the players scattering toward the parking lot, sweat-drenched and laughing. The giant wandered closer to the sidelines, casually wiping his forehead with the hem of his shirt, revealing a glimpse of a tattoo that ran like a river up his arm. He didn't approach, not directly. He just slowed his steps, drifting near enough to see what Lily was drawing. She looked up, blinking against the brightness, and smiled. Not the shy, nervous smile she saved for strangers, but something warmer. Caleb pushed off the truck, heart hammering against his ribs, unsure whether to step in or hang back. The man crouched down a few feet away, no easy feat for someone his size, and tapped the asphalt lightly with one huge finger, as if asking silent permission. Lily giggled and turned the sketchpad toward him, beaming with pride. Caleb caught the flicker of emotion that crossed the man's face. Something cracked open behind that easy smile. A flicker of memory, or grief, or maybe just recognition of a kindred spirit. Whatever it was, it anchored him there, in that dusty parking lot, beneath the heavy Florida sun. "She's good," the man said finally, his voice carrying easily across the short distance, meant for Caleb as much as for Lily. Caleb nodded stiffly, unsure of what to say, unsure of what this was. A chance meeting, a strange kindness, another trick of fate he couldn't afford to trust. The man stood towering again, and offered a small wave, before wandering back toward a battered SUV parked across the lot. He moved slowly, like he was giving Caleb space to make a choice, to follow, or to let the moment pass. Lily tugged at her father's hand, her voice soft but insistent. "Daddy, he's nice. He likes my drawings." Caleb stared at the retreating figure, his mind a tangle of suspicion and weary hope. He had learned the hard way that charity often came wrapped in strings. That pity, however well-intentioned, usually asked for something in return, and yet something about the encounter gnawed at the part of him that hadn't yet been crushed by life. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the lot. Somewhere deep inside Caleb, a decision stirred. Tomorrow, he promised himself. Tomorrow he'd find a way to ask. Tomorrow he'd take the risk. For now he gathered Lily into his arms, her small body a warm living weight against him. The world might have turned its back, but he hadn't. Not yet. Not ever. As he settled into the driver's seat and listened to the old engine cough back to life, he glanced once more at the man loading gear into his SUV, the giant who had seen them, truly seen them, without pity or judgment. Sometimes, Caleb thought, crossroads didn't look like signs and flashing lights. Sometimes they looked like faded asphalt, and a stranger's quiet smile under the heavy sun. And sometimes, if you were lucky, they could change everything. Shaquille O'Neal had seen a lot of things in his life: locker rooms filled with ego, streets filled with struggle, crowds roaring his name one night and forgetting it the next. Fame had sharpened his instincts, made him a keen observer of what people said without speaking. And in the shy tilt of Lily's smile, in the guarded tension of Caleb's shoulders, he saw something too familiar to ignore. It was the look of people used to being overlooked. People taught by life to expect little and trust less. People balancing on the thin edge of survival, hoping the ground wouldn't crumble beneath them today. Shaq didn't step in right away. That wasn't his way. Help was a delicate thing. Done wrong, it became another wound, so he kept his distance, choosing instead to watch from afar, not out of suspicion, but out of respect. He returned to the park over the next few days, blending into the background with surprising ease for a man of his size. Pickup games, small talk with kids, water bottles shared under the blazing sun, casual, unthreatening, and all the while, his gaze flickered to the rusted truck tucked beneath the same dying oak tree, its windows cracked open to release the heat, its presence a silent testament to battles fought in private. He noticed how Caleb carried himself, wary but proud, every movement tight with the tension of a man who had too much to protect and too little left to lose. He noticed how Lily clutched her sketch pad like a shield, her drawings growing messier as her vision slipped further away, though she never once let the sadness reach her voice when she spoke. And he noticed something else too, the way the world around them responded. At the gas station down the street, Caleb approached the counter with a handful of crumpled bills, only for the cashier to narrow his eyes and ask for ID, even though Caleb was only buying milk and bread. Shaq watched from a distance as Caleb calmly produced his driver's license, jaw tightening when the man scrutinized it like he expected it to be fake. At the diner near the park, when Caleb asked if there were any day-old biscuits they could have at a discount, the waitress's smile faltered. She tilted her chin slightly, her voice laced with condescension as she said, "We don't do charity." Shaq saw the way Caleb bowed his head slightly, not in defeat, but in the practiced way of someone who had long ago learned how to avoid escalating pointless battles. It wasn't overt hatred. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Small humiliations dressed up as policy, polite dismissals that carved deep grooves of injustice into a man's spirit. It was the kind of prejudice that wore a mask of civility. Harder to name, harder to fight, but every bit as destructive. Shaq felt a slow burn rise in his chest. He remembered his mother's voice, sharp with warning and love. Use your size for more than basketball. Use your heart too. He wasn't the kid from the projects anymore. But some things you never unlearned. He had lived enough life to know that throwing money at a problem didn't heal the hurt beneath it. If he wanted to help Caleb and Lily, he had to do it the right way, with dignity, with choice, with trust. The plan started to take shape as he sat in his SUV one evening, watching Caleb coax Lily into sleep in the cramped backseat of the truck. Shaq's hands tightened around the steering wheel. This wasn't charity. This was a rescue mission. Silent, unseen, but no less vital. Still, he hesitated. Not because he doubted his own intentions, but because he knew trust was a currency far more fragile than dollars. Caleb had been burned too many times. A well-meaning offer could easily be mistaken for pity, and pity could wound deeper than hatred ever could. Shaq decided he needed to earn his way in. He needed to make Caleb see not just a helping hand, but a fellow traveler, someone who understood that survival wasn't just about getting through the day. It was about holding on to your pride, your hope, your soul. The opportunity came faster than expected. One afternoon, as the heat clung thick and heavy over the park, Caleb's truck refused to start. The battery was dead, and Caleb stood over the open hood, sweat pouring down his face, cursing softly under his breath. Lily sat on the curb, her arms wrapped around her knees, trying hard not to look scared. Shaq approached slowly, offering a bottle of cold water first. Not words. Caleb eyed him warily but accepted it with a short nod. "You need a jump?" Shaq asked, voice casual, like two men swapping favors instead of one man extending lifelines. Caleb hesitated a fraction of a second, then gave a stiff nod. Pride was a hard thing to set aside, even when it was bleeding out between your ribs. Shaq popped the hood of his SUV and worked in silence, attaching cables, revving engines, the easy dance of someone who had fixed more than his share of broken things. When the truck finally sputtered back to life, a flicker of relief passed over Caleb's face, before he quickly masked it. "Thanks," Caleb said gruffly, wiping his hands on his jeans. The gratitude was real, but so was the caution. No problem, Shaq replied, offering a lopsided grin before retreating without fanfare. No speeches, no offers, no pressure. But as he walked away, he left a card tucked under the windshield wiper. Just a name and a number. Nothing else. An invitation without expectation. Shaq didn't look back. He knew better. Trust wasn't built by standing over a man's shoulder. It was built by walking away and letting him decide if he wanted to follow. That night, parked 2 blocks away, Shaq watched the truck lights flicker weakly as Caleb read the card under the pale moonlight. He saw the way Caleb's fingers hovered over his battered phone, the way he hesitated, torn between need and fear. Shaq leaned back in his seat, patience coiled tight inside him. He didn't know if Caleb would call. He didn't know if the man would ever trust him enough to let him in. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't walking away. Not this time. Not when it mattered most. The sun climbed high and hot over Clearwater. The next morning, a harsh white glare bouncing off the hood of the rusted truck where Caleb sat, staring down at the card still clutched between his fingers. The name printed there was simple. Sean O'Brien. No titles, no promises, just a number underneath. Caleb had turned it over a dozen times during the long night, weighing every possible outcome, wrestling with a gnawing mix of hope and suspicion. In a world where offers often came with hidden claws, trust was a dangerous gamble. Yet sitting in that cracked leather seat, sweat trickling down his back, Caleb knew he was out of time for fear. He dialed the number with trembling fingers, half expecting it to go to voicemail or ring out into nothing. Instead, a deep voice answered almost immediately, casual but alert. "You still looking for work?" Shaq asked, the words plain, almost offhanded, as if he were asking about the weather. Caleb hesitated, his pride warring with his desperation. "Yeah," he muttered, voice rough from disuse and doubt. "Good," Shaq said. "Meet me at the old Jefferson Community Center. Noon. We'll talk there." And just like that, the line went dead. No directions, no pitch, no explanations, just a time and place. A test, maybe. Or a setup. Caleb couldn't know. All he knew was that Lily's surgery clock was ticking down, and every second he wasted was another second lost. He found the community center tucked away on a battered side street, its paint peeling in long strips, windows boarded up with sun-bleached plywood. The front doors hung crooked on their hinges, and a tangle of weeds pushed up through the sidewalk cracks. It looked less like a beacon of hope and more like a forgotten relic, abandoned by a world too busy chasing new dreams to care about the old ones. Caleb parked the truck under a sagging oak tree and killed the engine, listening to the sudden silence thrum in his ears. Lily stirred in the back seat, but didn't wake, her sketch pad fallen across her chest like a shield she had outgrown. He tucked the card into his back pocket and approached the doors, heart hammering with every step. Inside, the air was thick with dust and disuse. A few rays of sunlight filtered through the broken windows, illuminating the scuffed basketball court and the faded murals of smiling children long since grown or forgotten. Shaq was already there, leaning casually against a battered folding table set up near the center of the court. He wore the same plain clothes, the same easy smile, but there was a tension to his frame now, a stillness that suggested something bigger moving beneath the surface. "You Caleb?" Shaq asked, as if he didn't already know. Caleb nodded, keeping his posture loose but wary. "You said there was work." "There is," Shaq replied, tossing him a set of keys that jingled sharp and loud in the empty space. "This place needs fixing. Roof's shot, wiring's a mess, floors are buckling. You do good work, you get paid. Straight up." Caleb caught the keys on instinct, the cold metal biting into his palm. It sounded almost too simple. A day's labor for a paycheck. No background checks. No lectures. Just work. But Caleb knew better than to believe in fairy tales. Life didn't hand you miracles wrapped in casual offers. "What's the catch?" Caleb asked, voice flat. Shaq's smile widened. "Just a little. No catch. Just trust." Those words hung between them, heavier than any contract. Caleb stared at the keys, the cracked tiles, the sagging ceiling. It could be a scam. It could be a setup. Or it could be something he hadn't tasted in a long time. A real chance. He thought of Lily lying in the truck, her world fading faster with each sunrise. He thought of the hospital bills stacked neatly in the glove box, unpaid and gathering dust. He thought of every time he'd been turned away, looked down on, told without words that he didn't belong. And he thought about the way this man had jumped his truck without fanfare, had handed him water without judgment, had offered work without pity. Maybe, just maybe, it was worth the risk. He nodded once, sharp and clean. All right, I'll work. Shaq's face didn't change, but something eased in his stance, as if a second invisible test had been passed. Start with the roof, Shaq said, pointing upward. We'll see where it goes from there. Caleb got to work immediately, stripping off his overshirt and hauling supplies from the back of the center. The tools were old, but usable. The tasks familiar in their brutal honesty. For the first time in weeks, he lost himself in something solid, something rehammer swinging, boards creaking, sweat soaking his skin. Caleb built something with his hands again, even if it wasn't his home, even if it wasn't forever. Shaq watched from a distance, arms folded across his chest, saying little. Occasionally he disappeared for an hour or two, returning with new supplies or food he left quietly on the folding table, without comment. He didn't hover. He didn't micromanage. He simply existed, a steady presence at the edge of Caleb's exhausted focus. As the afternoon dragged on, and the Florida heat reached a boiling point, Caleb began to sense the edges of a larger plan taking shape. It was in the way Shaq watched him. Not like an employer checking on work, but like a man measuring something far deeper than carpentry skills. Character, endurance, heart. There were moments when Caleb caught Shaq's gaze drifting toward the truck parked under the oak tree, where Lily now sat with her legs dangling out the open door, scribbling furiously in her sketchpad. A flicker of sadness, quickly buried, a tightening of the jaw that spoke volumes more than words ever could. Whatever this was, this strange offer, this silent audition, it wasn't random. It wasn't simple. Caleb could feel the weight of it building, like storm clouds gathering just beyond the horizon. And deep inside, despite every scar life had carved into him, a tiny spark of hope began to flicker again. But hope, he knew, could be the most dangerous gamble of all. And in the days to come he would learn just how much he stood to win, or lose by daring to believe. The storm that broke inside the Jefferson Community Center wasn't made of thunder or rain. It was the kind of storm that brewed silently, fueled by desperation, jealousy, and invisible wounds too long ignored. Caleb didn't see it coming at first, too focused on sanding the splintered floors, his muscles screaming from the day's relentless labor. Sweat dripped into his eyes, and every breath tasted like sawdust and hope. Then he heard the voice, sharp, bitter, close. You think you're the only one trying to survive around here? Caleb straightened slowly, dusting off his hands as he turned toward the sound. A man stood by the half-sanded doorway, arms crossed tight over his chest, lips curled into something halfway between a sneer and a smirk. He was lean and wiry, with restless eyes, and the kind of anger that clung to a man like a second skin. The man took a step closer, scuffing his boot across the warped floorboards. You ain't special, brother, he said, voice low and loaded. Plenty of folks looking for a handout, plenty more who deserve it more than you. Caleb's jaw tightened, instinct pulling his shoulders back into a defensive posture he hadn't needed in years. Not because he wanted a fight, he didn't, but because something inside him refused to shrink any further than life had already forced him to. I'm not looking for a handout, Caleb said evenly, his voice low enough not to wake the echoes of the hollowed-out center. Just work. The man laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. Yeah? That what you tell yourself when you let some rich boy string you along? His gaze flicked meaningfully toward the back of the center where Shaq sat alone at the folding table, thumbing through a worn notebook like he wasn't listening. But Caleb knew he was. He felt it in the charged air between the crumbling walls. Caleb looked the man over, the frayed jeans, the hungry eyes, and understood. He wasn't just another worker. He was another fighter, another man trying to claw a future out of a world that wanted him invisible. But that didn't mean he had the right to tear Caleb down.
What's your name? Caleb asked.
Voice still measured. The man hesitated, caught off guard by the question. Logan, he muttered. Well, Logan, Caleb said, wiping the sweat from his brow. Maybe you ought to spend more time fixing this place up and less time tearing folks down. For a moment silence stretched between them, thick and brittle. In another place, another time, maybe it would have broken into violence. But here, something else cracked first, the mask of bitterness on Logan's face. For a fraction of a second, Caleb saw the raw fear underneath, fear of being overlooked, fear of losing the one chance he thought he had. You think he's just gonna pick you? Logan spat, But there was less venom now, more desperation. Men like him, they don't choose men like us. They play savior, make you dance for crumbs. Caleb didn't answer. He didn't have to, because he understood too well the twisting hollow ache that came from wanting to believe someone could be different, and the crushing certainty that they wouldn't be. From across the room, Shaq lifted his gaze, locking eyes with Caleb. There was no pity there, no judgment, just a quiet challenge, as if he was asking, "Who are you?" when no one's watching. Caleb made his choice. He turned back to the floor, picked up the sander, and got back to work. Not because he was trying to prove himself to Shaq, not because he wanted to win some invisible competition, but because the only thing he had left to cling to was his own damn pride. Logan watched him for a long moment, shoulders rigid with indecision, before muttering a curse under his breath and stalking off toward another corner of the building. The air inside the center felt heavier now, weighted with things left unsaid. Caleb worked through it, muscle memory and stubbornness carrying him forward even as his mind churned. He knew Logan wasn't wrong to be angry. The system wasn't fair. It had never been fair. Men like them had always had to work twice as hard for half as much, had always been expected to be grateful for the scraps they were thrown. It didn't excuse the bitterness, but it explained it. Shaq moved eventually, unfolding his massive frame from the chair and strolling across the floor with a deceptively casual gait. He didn't speak when he reached Caleb, didn't offer praise or correction. He simply crouched down, picked up a second sander, and began working beside him. Side by side, in the dust and heat and brokenness, they labored without words. Two men from very different worlds, bound by something deeper than circumstance. A shared understanding that dignity wasn't given. It was earned, reclaimed, fought for one stubborn breath at a time. Hours passed like that, the sun dipping lower, the shadows lengthening across the scuffed court. Somewhere in the building's rafters, a pigeon fluttered noisily, kicking loose a puff of ancient dust that drifted down like snow. By the time Caleb finally set down his tools, his back screaming and his hands raw, the floor gleamed faintly in the dimming light. It wasn't perfect, but it was whole again, and in its way, it was a testament. Shaq straightened slowly, wiping his hands on his jeans. He said nothing, just gave Caleb a small nod, one that carried more weight than 1,000 speeches. Caleb nodded back, a spark of cautious hope flickering to life inside him. Not certainty, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, the storm was beginning to pass. Or maybe the real test was only just beginning. The next morning dawned heavy and still, the humid air wrapping around Clearwater like a second skin. Caleb sat on the front steps of the Jefferson Community Center, his hands aching from the day's previous work, his mind swirling in 1,000 different directions. Lily slept curled up in the back seat of the truck again, the crumpled sketch pad rising and falling with every shallow breath. The future still looked like a cliff's edge. No matter how hard he had worked, no matter how much sweat he had poured into these broken walls, there was no guarantee that anything would change. The world owed him nothing. It had proven that time and time again. Footsteps echoed softly across the cracked pavement. Caleb looked up to see Shaq approaching, his massive frame silhouetted against the bleached morning sky. He moved with a steady calmness, the kind that demanded attention without ever asking for it. In one hand he carried 2 plain white envelopes. Shaq didn't speak right away. He simply stood before Caleb, those deep-set eyes unreadable. The envelopes held out like a silent offering, or a final judgment. "You got a choice," Shaq said finally, his voice low and even. "One of these will change your life today. The other one, it'll make surviving a little easier. That's all I'm gonna tell you." He placed both envelopes on the step between them, side by side. No labels, no clues, just 2 doors, and no way of knowing what lay behind either one. Caleb stared at them, his pulse hammering in his ears. The smart move, the obvious move, was to grab the cash. It would put food in Lily's belly, gas in the truck, maybe buy them a few more nights in a cheap motel. A temporary lifeline. But the other envelope, the one tied to the cryptic address, it whispered something else. Risk, uncertainty, maybe even something bigger than survival. He licked his dry lips, his mind racing. Was this a trick? A test? Was he being set up to fail again? To be laughed at for daring to hope? Every scar he carried screamed at him to take the sure thing, to stop believing in miracles that never came. But when he glanced back at the truck, At Lily's small hand pressed against the window as she slept, he remembered something deeper. He remembered that surviving wasn't living. That getting by wasn't the same as giving his daughter a real future. He reached out, heart pounding so loud it blurred the edges of the world, and chose the envelope on the left. Shaq's expression didn't change. He simply nodded once, as if Caleb had confirmed something he already knew. "Open it when you're ready," Shaq said, stepping back. "And whatever's inside, follow through, no matter what." The weight of the envelope was surprisingly light in Caleb's hands. He wanted to tear it open right there, but instinct told him to wait, to take a breath, to steady himself before whatever storm waited inside. Shaq turned without another word, and disappeared into the growing heat of the morning, his broad shoulders blending into the shimmering air. Caleb watched him go, feeling like he had just stepped off a ledge with no way to climb back. Finally, he slid a calloused finger under the flap and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. It wasn't cash. It wasn't a check. It was an address.
No explanation. No signature. Just an address written in clean, blocky letters, along with one line scrawled beneath it.
"Trust the road, not the map." Caleb sat back, the words spinning in his mind like a riddle with no answer. He could still back out, still beg Shaq for the money instead. Pride might take a hit, but pride didn't fill an empty stomach. But deep inside, in the place where fear lived right alongside stubborn hope, he knew he wouldn't. Because if he didn't trust now, he never would. He roused Lily gently from her sleep, her small face creased with confusion. As she blinked against the sunlight, she asked no questions as he buckled her into the seat, her trust in him absolute, even when he barely trusted himself. The drive was long and aimless at first, the address leading them away from the familiar streets, into rougher parts of town where storefronts sat abandoned, and graffiti bloomed across crumbling brick walls. Caleb's stomach twisted with doubt at every turn. Finally, after what felt like hours, he found the place, a squat, weather-beaten building sandwiched between a pawn shop and an old laundromat. A single flickering light buzzed above a rusted door. No signs, no promises, just a door, waiting to be opened. Caleb parked the truck and sat for a long moment, gripping the wheel hard enough to make his knuckles ache. His mind replayed every moment that had led him here, every insult swallowed, every door slammed in his face, every small kindness offered without strings. This was either the biggest mistake of his life, or the start of something he had stopped daring to dream about. He squeezed Lily's hand gently, offering a small smile he didn't quite feel. "Stay right here, Peanut," he said, voice steady despite the chaos roiling inside him. She nodded, settling back with her sketchpad, oblivious to the battle raging behind his tired eyes. Caleb climbed out, feeling the weight of 100 invisible eyes pressing down on him. He approached the door, heart thundering, every instinct screaming to turn back. But he didn't. He raised his hand, curled his fingers into a fist, and knocked once. Then twice more. The sound echoed in the stillness, loud and final. Somewhere beyond that door, destiny shifted. And Caleb Bryant, against every scar, every loss, every fear stitched into his soul, stood firm and waited for it to open. The door swung open, with a reluctant groan, revealing nothing but a shadowy, empty hallway beyond. Caleb stepped inside cautiously, heart pounding against his ribs. His boots echoed against the cracked tile floor as he moved forward, every step heavier than the last. The stale smell of dust and mildew filled the air, clinging to the peeling walls like an accusation. There was no crowd waiting, no banner strung across the ceiling proclaiming a new beginning, no voice calling out to congratulate him on passing some unseen test. Just silence, crushing, absolute silence. Room after room stood abandoned. Old metal chairs stacked in corners, fluorescent lights flickering overhead, a forgotten vending machine humming weakly against the far wall. Caleb's throat tightened as he searched, the pit of his stomach dropping with each empty space he encountered. He had chosen wrong. The truth slammed into him harder than any punch ever could. This wasn't a gateway to salvation. It was a dead end, a cruel reminder that men like him didn't get miracles. They got empty buildings and broken promises. He stumbled back outside, the hot afternoon sun slamming into his skin like a rebuke. Lily peered at him from the truck, her wide eyes questioning, trusting, unknowing. Caleb forced a tight smile to his lips as he approached, masking the failure that twisted deep inside him. He slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel, forehead resting against the worn leather. His mind spiraled. Fury, shame, regret, all tangling into a knot he couldn't untie. He should have taken the cash. He should have played it safe. He should have known better than to believe in anything else. A tap on the window jolted him upright. Caleb turned his head sharply, heart leaping into his throat, to find Shaq standing there. No towering figure of invincibility now. No easy smile. Just a man, stripped bare by the weight of what he carried. Caleb rolled the window down slowly, the old mechanism squealing in protest. The two men locked eyes, one burning with betrayal, the other heavy with something deeper, something harder to name. Shaq said nothing for a moment. He just stood there breathing slowly, as if gathering the right words from some hidden place deep inside. "I know what you're thinking," Shaq said finally, voice low, rough-edged, "and you got every right to be mad." Caleb stared at him, fists clenched tight in his lap. He wanted to lash out, wanted to demand why, but he held himself still, barely. "I didn't send you there to find a gift," Shaq continued, stepping back so Caleb could open the door. "I sent you there to find yourself." The words hit Caleb like a slap he hadn't seen coming. He swung his legs out of the truck, standing face to face with the man who had upended his world with nothing more than an envelope. "I don't need lessons," Caleb said, voice shaking with restrained fury. "I need to save my daughter." Shaq's face tightened, sorrow flashing across his features. "I know," he said simply, "and that's why I had to know what you were made of. Not desperate enough to grab at anything, not broken enough to turn back when the road got rough." Caleb swallowed hard, rage and heartbreak tangling together inside him. Shaq pulled something from his back pocket, a worn, creased photograph. He held it out without speaking. Caleb took it hesitantly, glancing down. The photo was old, the colors faded by time. A skinny teenage boy with two big shoes and a crooked smile stood next to a rundown house eerily similar to Caleb's old one. Standing beside him was a woman, her hand firm on his shoulder, her pride a shield against a world that had offered them little and expected even less. "I was you once," Shaq said, voice thick. "Poor, invisible, wrote off by every system meant to help me. My mom worked 2 jobs, 3 when she could. There were days we didn't know if we'd eat. Nights we prayed the landlord didn't show up with an eviction notice." He drew a shaky breath, his massive hands clenching briefly at his sides. "I made it out because people didn't hand me things. They showed me how to fight for them, how to keep my head up when the world wanted it bowed, how to believe I was more than my circumstances." Shaq's gaze sharpened, pinning Caleb in place. "You already have what it takes," he said. "I just needed you to see it too." Caleb felt something crack open inside him, raw and trembling. Every moment of doubt, every humiliation, every sacrifice, it all rose up in him, like a tide. He thought about Lily, about the nights he'd stayed awake counting pennies, about the mornings she woke up smiling, even when the world outside their windows crumbled. He had never stopped fighting for her. Not once. Maybe that was the point. Shaq nodded toward the bed of his SUV, where 2 large duffel bags rested, the zippers bulging. "One's for the surgery," Shaq said. "The other's for your future, yours to build, however you choose." Caleb staggered back a step, the words barely sinking in. He wanted to believe it, but life had taught him not to trust gifts with strings.
"No conditions?"
Caleb rasped, voice barely audible. Shaq's smile was sad but proud. "No conditions, just faith. Faith that you'll keep walking, even when the road disappears under your feet." For a long moment, neither man moved. The Florida heat shimmered around them, cicadas screaming in the distance, the world holding its breath. Then Caleb nodded, a small shaking gesture, and felt the weight on his chest begin to lift for the first time in what felt like forever. Not because someone had saved him, because someone had believed in him enough to let him save himself. And sometimes, that was the greatest gift of all. The hospital room was bathed in a muted, sterile light, the soft hum of machines filling the silence. Caleb sat beside Lily's bed, his hands folded tight in his lap, watching the slow, steady rise and fall of her chest. Bandages covered her eyes, a fragile veil between her and the world she would soon see again, if the surgery had worked. Hours earlier they had walked into the hospital with nothing but a letter of guarantee in hand, Shaq's name never mentioned. The bill, an impossible mountain, had been wiped away as if it had never existed. No reporters, no flashing cameras, just quiet efficiency. Caleb had signed the forms with a hand that trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of gratitude he could not find words for. Now, in the quiet aftermath, Doubt still clawed at him. What if it hadn't worked? What if he had risked everything for another heartbreak? The door creaked open, and Shaq stepped inside, ducking his head slightly to clear the frame. He moved with a quiet reverence, like a man entering sacred ground. In his arms he carried a battered duffel bag and a small wooden box, both worn by time but handled with care. Caleb stood, his heart thudding hard against his ribs. Shaq set the duffel on the floor and the box on the small table by Lily's bed. Then he pulled up a chair and sat, his giant frame folded awkwardly into the tiny space. For a while, neither man spoke. The machines beeped. Lily slept on. "I promised myself a long time ago," Shaq said finally, his voice low, almost breaking, "that if I ever made it out, I wouldn't forget where I came from." He leaned back, staring up at the ceiling as if seeing another place, another time. "There was a night when we didn't have food," he said. "Not even bread. My mom, she made a game out of it. Told me we were playing make-believe dinner. I laughed. Thought it was funny. Thought it was magic." He smiled bitterly. Didn't realize until years later that she had gone hungry so I wouldn't. Caleb swallowed hard, throat burning. "Later, when people started knowing my name," Shaq continued, "I saw the way some of them looked at me, like I didn't belong. Like no matter how high I climbed, I'd always be the kid from the projects." His hand tightened into a loose fist on his knee. "They didn't see my work. They didn't see my mother's sacrifices. Just labels." The weight of the story pressed down on the small room, squeezing out the last of Caleb's doubt. "I don't do this because I want pats on the back," Shaq said, finally looking at him. "I do it because someone has to believe in men like you. Men like my mom. Men who don't get headlines, but who fight like hell every day, just to survive." He nodded toward the wooden box. "Open it." Caleb hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside was a set of house keys, a lease signed and paid for a full year in advance, and a note written in bold, steady handwriting. "Home is not just walls, it's the people you fight for inside them." Tears blurred Caleb's vision. He tried to blink them away, but they spilled over anyway, running down his cheeks unchecked. For so long he had carried the weight alone, convinced that needing help made him weak. But here, in this moment, he understood something deeper. Accepting kindness wasn't weakness. It was an act of courage. He dropped into the chair, burying his face in his hands as sobs racked his body, raw and silent. Shaq said nothing, offering only his presence, letting Caleb unravel years of quiet pain without shame. When the storm inside Caleb finally eased, he lifted his head, breathing hard but lighter than he had in years. "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely enough, but all he had. Shaq smiled, a small, knowing smile, and clapped a hand gently against Caleb's shoulder. No words needed. Later that week, after Lily's bandages were removed, and the doctor confirmed the surgery's success, Shaq arranged a gathering at the Jefferson Community Center. No cameras, no reporters, just neighbors, families, kids running wild across the polished floors that Caleb had spent days sanding and restoring. Caleb stood near the back, holding Lily's hand as she beamed up at him, her bright eyes wide and amazed at everything she could finally see clearly. Shaq stood quietly off to one side, watching without needing the spotlight. In the center of the newly repaired gym, a plaque had been mounted on the wall, simple and unadorned, dedicated to those who fight unseen battles and still choose kindness. No names, no grand gestures, just a message, a reminder that real strength wasn't in being seen. It was in lifting others without needing applause. As Caleb looked around at the faces smiling, laughing, living, he felt something shift inside him, a breaking away of old chains, a rebuilding of something stronger than pride, stronger than fear. It was hope. Real, stubborn, living hope. He knelt beside Lily, pulling her into his arms as she giggled and leaned into him, her small fingers tracing the lines of his face like she was memorizing him all over again. "I see you, Daddy," she said softly. And for the first time in a long, long time, Caleb believed it. He saw himself too. The first cool breeze of autumn drifted through Clearwater, carrying with it the scent of fallen leaves, and something newer, something sweeter. Caleb leaned against the porch railing of their modest but freshly painted home, watching Lily race around the small yard, her laughter breaking like music through the crisp air. It was a sound he would never take for granted again. Months had passed since the surgery, the bandages, the anxiety, the silent prayers whispered into sleepless nights. All had faded into memories, tucked away behind brighter, stronger days. Lily's vision wasn't just restored, it seemed sharpened, like she was seeing the world for the first time and refusing to miss a single detail. Caleb closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sun warm his face. He thought about how close they had come to losing everything. About the man who had changed their story not with charity, but with belief. Shaq's gift hadn't just been money or shelter. It had been dignity. A future. He heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel and opened his eyes to see Lily sprinting toward him. Cheeks flushed, eyes bright with joy. She skidded to a stop in front of him, her sneakers kicking up little clouds of dust. "Daddy," she cried, bouncing on her toes. "I can see you. I can really, really see you." Caleb dropped to one knee, his throat tightening painfully. Lily cupped his face in her small hands, her fingers tracing the familiar lines with wonder, the way she used to when she was going blind. But this time, her gaze locked onto his, clear and unwavering. "You're smiling," she said, as if it were the most important thing in the world. Caleb laughed, a broken, beautiful sound. "Yeah, Peanut. I'm smiling." He pulled her into a hug, holding her so tight she squealed with laughter. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the weight on his chest was completely gone. No more dark clouds looming overhead, no more waiting for the ground to give out beneath them. Only light. Only life. Later that afternoon, they drove into town for ice cream. Something small, something ordinary, something precious. Caleb let Lily pick the music, and she sang along to every song, her voice wild and tuneless but full of life. When they arrived, Caleb noticed a familiar figure leaning casually against a parked SUV across the street. Shaq wore a simple hoodie pulled low over his face, but there was no mistaking that towering frame, that quiet, grounded presence. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching with a smile tucked behind his beard, content to be invisible to everyone but those who knew to look. Caleb caught his eye and nodded, a small silent message packed with everything he couldn't find words for. Shaq nodded back, a ghost of a smile curling at the corners of his mouth, before turning away and disappearing into the crowd. No fanfare, no spotlight, just a man keeping a promise in the quietest, most profound way possible. Inside the ice cream shop, Caleb and Lily sat by the window, the afternoon light spilling across the table. Lily chose bubblegum pink, with rainbow sprinkles, her face lighting up with each sugary bite. Caleb watched her, committing every detail to memory. The tilt of her head, the glint of sunlight in her eyes, the way she swung her legs under the table without a care in the world. Around them, life buzzed along. Parents wrangled sticky-handed toddlers. Teenagers laughed too loudly. An old couple shared a milkshake in a booth, near the back. Ordinary scenes Caleb had spent too long viewing from the outside, as if through fogged glass. Now he was a part of it again. Whole scene. On the wall near the register, a small brass plaque caught his eye. It hadn't been there before. "Kindness is the only wealth that grows when spent." No signatures. No dedications. Just a simple truth, left there like a breadcrumb for those willing to see it. Caleb smiled to himself, understanding immediately. Heroes didn't always wear capes or flash across television screens. Sometimes they wore old sneakers and faded hoodies. Sometimes they moved quietly through the world, changing it in ways that could never be measured by news articles or accolades. The ripple effect of an unseen hero had carried Caleb and Lily through the darkest storm of their lives, and into a light they had thought unreachable. And now, standing in that light, Caleb realized that maybe the greatest gift wasn't just being saved. Maybe it was being given the chance to become a light for someone else. As they left the shop, Lily skipping ahead to chase a falling leaf, Caleb made himself a promise. When the time came, when he saw someone else stranded in the dark, he wouldn't hesitate. He wouldn't question. He would reach back, offer a hand, and pull them forward, just like someone had done for him. The world still wasn't perfect. Prejudice still lingered like a stubborn stain. Hard days would still come. But Caleb knew now that resilience wasn't about standing alone. It was about building bridges, about carrying each other through the impossible. And as the last rays of sun dipped behind the rooftops, casting long golden shadows across the street, Caleb Bryant walked forward, hand in hand with his daughter, eyes wide open, heart full, ready to be the hero he once needed. And somewhere in the distance, unseen but deeply felt, a giant smiled and walked away, leaving the world a little brighter than he found it. Every story leaves a mark. Some heal, some inspire, some awaken the fight within us. If this journey moved you, imagine what's still ahead. Stay close, because the next story might just be the one that changes you forever. The world needs more light, and together, we're just getting started.